Beaches, East York.
Monsieur le Président, Radio-Canada.
Mr. Speaker, Radio-Canada said yesterday that the costs of the F-35 fighter jets could double by the time they're delivered. Instead of $65 million per jet that the government put forward originally, the cost could total $133 million. Why is the government the only one that trusts the initial estimates on the part of Lockheed Martin? Why doesn't this government accept the proof that the replacement of CF-18s will call for an open bidding process?
A matter of course, we're taking the responsible step of following a procurement process that has been in place for a significant period of time that a number of countries are participating in.
Mr. Speaker, whereas the costs of the F-35s continue to climb, the Minister of State, the Associate Minister of State for National Defense claims that the fighter jets and their upkeep in the long term will cost $9 billion instead of $16. Now, all countries that intend to buy F-35s expect to pay a much higher price, but this government is the only one that thinks it can get away with this cost. Will this government stop floating the population and give them the true costs by telling the population that the F-35s will only cost $9 billion or $16 billion? Why don't they tell them it'll be $30 billion?
We've been crystal clear. We've committed $9 billion for the replacement of the CF-18. In fact, it not only includes the cost of the aircraft, this will include spares, weapon systems, infrastructure, and training simulators, as well as the contingency associated with this important procurement. And, Mr. Speaker, we are purchasing the most cost-effective variant at the time of peak production when the costs will be at their lowest. Even the Parliamentary Budget Officer has admitted to that. So, Mr. Speaker, why are the NDP constantly against getting the best equipment for the best forces in the world?
The honourable member for Beaches, East York.
Mr. Speaker, instead of having a serious RFP, the list of problems with the F-35s continues to get longer. The costs of the program have more than doubled. The F-35s are losing all their simulated combat. Communication system doesn't work, and the worst is that pilots aren't safe. All is well, says the government, when it takes, with regard to, the government says that it takes the safety of our troops seriously, but this fiasco shows the contrary. When will the Minister of Defense finally admit that this is a failure? Mr. Speaker, all the information that the member has used is not true.
Really cannot understand about the NDP is why they oppose getting the best equipment for our military, why they oppose the incredible benefits these purchases will bring to the entire country, including Quebec. I completely am baffled by the position taken by the NDP, which runs contrary to the wishes of the military and the aerospace industry.
Mr. Speaker, each day the F-35s have a new batch of problems. Today, what we have learned in an internal national defense report is that the F-35s are causing so much that we won't be able to afford enough planes to meet our needs. As a result, there won't be any margin of error if there are lost aircraft. This adds to the concerns with regard to their astronomical costs and their safety. When will the government stop denying the truth? And when will it announce an open and transparent competition?
And Mr. Speaker, what we have seen time and time again from the NDP, every time we've brought forward improvements for the military, whether it be improvements for the children of deceased veterans, whether it be improvements for their salaries, for their equipment, whether it's anything from the graveyard to the schoolyard, the NDP oppose if it will improve things for the Canadian forces.
Conservative stand on the F-35 purchase continue to take a nosedive. Last night, the Associate Minister of Defense contradicted his own minister and said the more honest and ethical approach will be to admit the government doesn't know how much each plane will cost. They're just guessing. Mr. Speaker, we are talking about contract worth billions. We know the Prime Minister doesn't talk to the Minister of Defense. Is the Prime Minister also in error with the Associate Minister?
Mr. Speaker, we've been crystal clear. We've committed $9 billion for the replacement of the CF-18. In fact, it not only includes the cost of the aircraft, this will include spares, weapon systems, infrastructure, and training simulators, as well as the contingency associated with this important procurement. And Mr.
Speaker, The F-35s will cost more than anticipated, but the government has refused to admit it. 6 months ago, the government was talking about a $16 billion contract, and this week the government was talking about $9 billion. Last night, the Associate Minister of Defense contradicted his minister by admitting finally that the Conservatives had no idea what the total would be for the F-35. Mr. Speaker, why doesn't the government tell the public that the $9 billion for the F-35s is just a smokescreen to hide the biggest fiasco in the history of the military industry? Minister for Defense.
Mr. Speaker, the F-35 aircraft is the one item that is absolutely critical and helps to ensure that we will maintain our sovereignty. Absolutely. And well into the future. It includes not only the aircraft, it includes other components for years to come into the future, enabling Canada to be competitive and coordinated with our partners in NATO and the UN mission.
Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
Process for shipbuilding contracts bulletproof. So, really no admit his gamble on F-35 jets is riddled with holes. Conservatives are ready to blow billions without a single competitive bid. Is the cost per jet 65 or 148 millions? Canadians don't know, the Associate Minister doesn't know, and the Defense Minister don't know. If the process was fair for shipbuilding, why don't we have the same for jets?
Mr. Speaker, I too applaud the fair and transparent way in which the National Shipbuilding Procurement was awarded. Mr. Speaker, on the F-35s, I'll remind the member opposite that the extensive and rigorous competitive process had taken place, and it happened under the previous Liberal government. While the Liberal members in this House have gotten cold feet about the program they started, the F-35 will provide our men and women in uniform with the best equipment to do their jobs and return home to their families, as we have supported them during their campaign in Libya.
Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Mr. Speaker, the F-35 procurement plan continues to nosedive. F-35 test flights in the States could be grounded. Why? Because there are too many questions involving safety. The F-35s have flight problems that are 3 times more frequent than what is usually acceptable. We're not making anything up. This is what the Pentagon arms officials are saying. How can the minister continue to state that the F-35s are indispensable for our troops and our pilots' safety, whereas our neighbors to the south are saying the exact opposite? Minister of Defense.
In giving our brave men and women in uniform the best. In the F-35, we're getting the latest technology. Some is still in the final development stage. And as a result, we're giving Canadian industry the chance to become world leaders in manufacturing. The opposition would prefer that we bought 30-year-old technology and didn't help Canadian industry lead the world. Mr. Speaker, we disagree.
Mr. Speaker, it's not surprising that the Americans are following the Australian, Great Britain, Netherlands, and Denmark example in ordering fewer planes, 55% to be more specific. All of these countries are cutting back on their orders, all except for Canada. Even in the face of these facts, only this government is blindly approving the F-35 program, a program that will cost us billions and is doomed to failure. When will the Minister of Defense recognize his errors? When will we move and have a public bidding process, Minister?
Here are those that are blind to the truth. Mr. Speaker, let's be clear on the choice being offered. Our government has decided that our men and women in uniform need the best technology available to get the job done and keep them safe. We are doing this in a way that gives Canadian industry access to billions of dollars of work and creates thousands of good jobs. The opposition would slam the door on these contracts, throw those workers out of jobs, and delay replacing the CF-18 years late, the very aircraft that are edging their.
The procurement process for the F-35s has become a veritable farce. The aircraft is so costly and flawed that, apart from Canada, no one is interested in buying it. The U.S. Defense Secretary, Leon Panetta, said himself yesterday that even his country could withdraw from the program. There's only one person who still believes in the future of this aircraft, and that's the Minister of Defense. When will he finally open his eyes and realize that Canada's being had?
And our closest military allies understand the importance of this program to the protection of our sovereignty. Canada isn't the only country among our closest allies warning critics of the damage their reckless plans would cause to the military and aerospace workers. And I'm pleased that Secretary Panetta is taking similar action to warn Congress of the reckless, short-sighted implications such proposals would in fact incur. If our opposition had their way, they would cancel the equipment our Air Force needs and also put some 80,000 Canadians out of work.
We know that the F-18s will have to be replaced by 2018-2019. The Associate Minister of Defense said last week that Canada was crusading for the F-35s. Why is the minister so obstinately crusading to promote a program that's deemed to fail from the start? Why is the minister so obstinately crusading when all other countries, including the U.S., are stepping back? Why is the minister only listening to what's being promised by Lockheed Martin? And why doesn't the minister have a plan B?
Mr. Speaker, the only crusade is the crusade to malign a very important asset for our young men and women who actually use the equipment, and also to maintain our Canadian sovereignty as well as creating jobs. The member opposite is stuck in a time warp of useless rhetoric, misinformation and misrepresentation about the benefits to Canada of the F-35 program.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we learned that Industry Canada stalled the F-35 project for over a year because they were not satisfied with Lockheed Martin's work. This government argues with their own experts. Mr. Speaker, every day new problems arise in the F-35 project. The program costs are fantastic and the safety of the pilots are at risk. Will the Minister of Defense finally recognize that the program is a fiasco, pure and simple?
Participation in the Joint Strike Fighter program continues to be a success. The end result of this complex process is successfully ensuring that Canadian industry benefits from the enormous opportunities provided by this program. It is ensuring our Canadian forces have the best aircraft they need to protect our sovereignty by land, sea and air now and well into the future. Though we are still in the early stages, Canadian companies have already secured $370 million in contracts supporting industry that employs 80,000 Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, if the government truly believed in economic spin-offs, they would tie in equivalent investment requirements for the country, which they are not doing. Mr. Speaker, the F-35 for this government are not safe, they're not adapted to the Canadian North and its realities, and the costs are skyrocketing without any economic spin-offs. When will the government do its homework, accept reality, and opt for an open, transparent bidding process that works for Canada? The Honourable Associate Minister.
Speaker, I appreciate the question from the Honourable Member, which provides yet another opportunity to highlight the fact that the F-35 provides the Canadian forces the best replacement for the aging CF-18 aircraft, provides an excellent advantage in defending Canadian sovereignty, and the F-35 program is progressing well and on track, Mr. Speaker.